Narcissism!
Have you heard the buzzword lately? While some psychology experts say the term should be reserved for clinical diagnosis, many people throw it around casually to describe frustrating bosses and hurtful ex-partners. Ideas of narcissism include self-obsession, self-serving, entitlement, and often manipulation and lack of empathy. However, narcissism is the result of complex childhood wounding and low self-esteem, often hidden so well that the narcissists themselves aren't aware of them.
I'm cool.
In this video, we'll think of narcissism not as a rare disorder or a casual term for anyone self-centered, but as a useful framework that's actually relevant to many, if not most of us. Understanding its causes and recognizing it in ourselves can be a starting place for growth. Let's first look at how narcissism develops. After a child is born, he learns about himself largely through his relationship with his primary caregivers, constantly referring to them to validate his emotions and help him get his needs met. He learns which expressions to show or hide based on his caregiver's reactions. For example, if the child is sad and the caregiver offers him a hug, his sadness is validated. His brain then processes that when he feels sad and expresses it, he receives support. On the other hand, if the caregiver invalidates the emotion, the child learns that this was not an acceptable emotion and represses it. While the child is blissfully unaware, the fast-working subconscious brain sorts and files information it receives from all those infinite moments of childhood. It decides what aspects of personality and emotion the child can safely express and which it cannot. Since in evolutionary terms, the survival of the child literally depends on not being rejected by caregivers. This sorting and filing is called splitting, and it refers to the separation of the rejected, repressed expressions from the affirmed and encouraged ones. The conglomeration of rejected traits and emotions, referred to as the shadow self by Carl Jung, gets shoved down so far that even as an adult, the person doesn't have conscious awareness of its existence. Here's where narcissism comes in. As the child becomes an adult, she continues seeking validation for this separated persona called the false self, not realizing she has repressed an entire part of who she is. So no matter how much affirmation she receives, on a deeper level, she has a sense of emptiness, worthlessness, and often unexplainable shame. With affirmation being directed only to her false self, it's impossible for her to feel loved beyond the superficial. It creates an insatiable hunger for approval that can never be filled, which, in extreme cases, may manifest as that grandiose and ceaseless attention-seeking that characterizes the stereotype of narcissism we all know. But the phenomenon of splitting shows up in other forms too. One of these is codependence, another buzzword, which we use to represent people pleasers, who tend to put other needs before theirs and have difficulty standing up for themselves. While pitted as opposites, codependence actually develops in a child similarly to narcissism. At a young age, the child learns that her value to caregivers is in fulfilling the caregiver's needs, and thus the child learns to split and repress her own needs. The codependent and narcissist are often drawn to each other in romantic relationships because the narcissist makes things all about them, and the codependent makes things all about their partner, perfectly complementing each other. However, many are now understanding that codependence and narcissism are two sides of the same coin and are just different manifestations of that splitting of self, of what traits and emotions the subconscious learns to express and which to repress. In another common example, the caregiver may affirm the child for fulfilling her needs, switching the roles of parent and child. Then, imagining himself as superior to other children because his own parent depends on him. As an adult, he celebrates his independence and belittles others, seeing himself as the most qualified person for any job. Yet, once again, lurking deep in his shadow self is a very real and unacknowledged pain that comes from isolation and from his parent failing to take care of him, to be strong for him so that he could experience being a child and being vulnerable in the safe company of his caregiver. There are many more manifestations of narcissism and splitting, most of which are so normalized that they go unnoticed in our society and in ourselves. Arguably, if narcissism is a result of splitting and the repression of the shadow self, then we all have some degree of narcissism within us. So what can be done to heal narcissism, and does it need healing? We'll get to that in the next video. But for now, thanks for checking us out, and keep an eye on what you're feeding that hungry id.